In this lesson, we will learn more about the Revolutionary battles that were fought in South Carolina. In the previous lesson, we learned that the British plan was to split the colonies. So, they focused all of their effort on one part at a time. And the first place they focused their effort was in the north. They chose New York and the north, and also Boston, of course, because Boston was kind of like the ringleader of the Patriots back then, as the starting point. One of the reasons they chose New York was because it had the most loyalists of all the colonies. And from 1776 to 1778, the New England and Middle colonies were the theater for the Revolutionary War. And the British were winning quite decisively in many of the battles that were fought there. However, there was a turning point in the war with the Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga, which is in New York. And this battle convinces France that the Patriots could win, and France joins the Patriots, which was a major success for the Patriots and a major downfall for the British. Well, after this, the British start to turn their attack to the south. And they choose South Carolina because South Carolina was only second to New York in the number of loyalists. So South Carolina had lots of loyalists, so the British, they choose to start their southern campaign in South Carolina. Now, the British did try to attack South Carolina once during the Battle of Sullivan's Island at the start of the War for Independence in 1776. However, we learned that the Patriots achieved victory at the Battle of Sullivan's Island, and largely because of the construction of Fort Moultrie, which was made of palmetto logs, which the British cannonballs bounced off of. It helped, too, that the tides were low and the British ships could not get close enough to attack the fort, or they were shooting at such long distances. But this causes the state of South Carolina early on to change their flag to what it is today in remembrance of the palmetto log fort. Fort Moultrie is why we have the palmetto tree on our flag, and I believe it happened during a crescent moon, which is why we have the crescent moon as well. So, now, this first battle in 1776 was a Patriot victory. However, later, the British are able to blockade Charlestown, which cuts off the supplies, which helped ensure their victory. And the blockade that was established then further constricted the Patriots all throughout the war. So this was a significant victory for the British when they took Charlestown again in 1780. Still, the Battle of Sullivan's Island, like the Battle of Saratoga, Patriot victories, the Battle of Charlestown was a defeat. Now, we also learned about how the British hoped the Loyalists in South Carolina would help them control the area and win the war. However, two things that the British did would lead to a loss of support from many South Carolinians, and it would lead them to join these partisan bands that were led by the gentlemen above. Whoops. So, back to this review. The two things that they did was they changed the terms of the parole of the prisoners from the Battle of Charlestown, because they paroled many people here, and they said that they could just go home as long as they promised not to fight in the war. Well, they changed it and said they had to join the British Army. Well, and the second thing is there were many groups of British soldiers that were going out and looting, burning, and taking over the homes of other of South Carolinians, which lead them to join these partisan bands that were led by the gentleman above, which we were already introduced to. The main partisan leaders, Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter. These are the two most famous that I talked to you about yesterday. There was also other partisan leaders, Andrew Pickens and William Hardin. They had various nicknames which describe their hit-and-run tactics that they used. They were strong patriots. They believed in the patriot cause, but they did not believe in the in the Continental Army tactics. So they believed in the Continental Army's cause, but not in the Continental Army's tactics. Because the Continental Army's tactics was to line up in rows, as the British did, and called traditional warfare. They hid in the woods and sneak attacked people. This brings us to further battles that were fought in South Carolina. And in August of 1780, the Battle of Camden was fought in South Carolina. And the significance of this battle is, after the Patriot defeat, almost all of South Carolina was controlled by the British. Now, the Battle of Camden was, the Continental Army tried to go up against the British using the British style of fighting, but the British were far too well trained. The Patriots, they had also militia members, but the militia was not as well trained, and they turned and ran, and the lines were broken. The British crushed the Patriots. This major battle, which was against British regular troops, was won by the British, and almost all of South Carolina was controlled by the British. After this battle, the commander, who was Horatio Gates, who was actually the hero of the battle where the French were convinced to join the war. What was the battle where the French were convinced to join the Patriot cause? Yes, it was Saratoga. He was the hero of the Battle of Saratoga. He lost, and it was seen by the Supreme Commander, General Washington, to replace him, and they replaced him with a gentleman named Nathaniel Greene. There's a book on my board. Nathaniel Greene was actually a Quaker, which is not significant to this, but a fact nonetheless. Now, Nathaniel Greene knew that the Continental Army was going to have to do a few things to eventually claim victory over the British. And one of those was that the Continental Army was going to have to coordinate with the groups led by Thomas Sumter and Francis Marion, yes, the partisans, and that they were going to have to fight a war of attrition or a defensive war, which is kind of like fighting a partisan battle. They were going to have to make the British tire of war and realize that to eventually claim victory would cost them too much. Here's the PowerPoint for the loss of Camden. As was said before, the Battle of Camden was a major defeat for the regular Continental Army. It was a Patriot loss. almost all of South Carolina would be controlled by the British after this battle. The South Carolina militia was not prepared, turned and fled in the face of the British regular forces. Here's a picture of the Battle of Camden. Here's Horatio Gates, who was the hero of the Battle of Saratoga, where the French joined the war, and he was replaced by Nathanael Greene, which was a Quaker from perhaps Pennsylvania. So Horatio Gates, command of the Southern Army, arm of the Continental Army, was transferred to Nathanael Greene, who understood the need to coordinate with the work of the state's partisans in order to fight a destructive war of attrition, termed today a mobile war. This was what the Vietnamese used against the Americans in the Vietnam War, that would unbalance and eventually destroy the British war effort. The next battle, chronologically, which occurred in October of 1780, was the Battle of Kings Mountain. And the Battle of Kings Mountain was in upcountry South Carolina. The Loyalist forces and British regulars had been rampaging, tearing through the backcountry, and were stopped at the Battle of Kings Mountain. This is because the mountain men in the upcountry from both North and South Carolina were tired of the British and Tory behavior and determined to stop it. They attacked the mostly Tory forces, which, Tory would be the Loyalists from South Carolina, from behind rocks and trees, inflicting heavy casualties and deaths. The Battle of Kings Mountain becomes a turning point in the war because the British begin to retreat from the upcountry after the battle. Although the British did try to surrender, the Patriots offered no quarter by the Patriots in retaliation for the harsh treatment of the Patriots by the British. So, once again, October 7th, 1780 is the Battle of Kings Mountain, which is about on my map where I drew it right here. In the upcountry, this is where Kings Mountain is. And it's a mountain. It's there today. And as was said, the significance of this, the turning point, it was a turning point where the British retreat from the upcountry. The battle was won when mountain men were mostly facing Tory, which would be people from South Carolina, forces. So, once again, to show the Civil War that was fought in South Carolina between South Carolina Patriots and South Carolina Loyalists, this would be it. As was said already from the PowerPoint slide, the Tories and British were being bad, and the Patriot mountain men were determined to stop it. And because the Tories and British in previous battles had not offered surrender terms to the Patriots did the same thing to these Tories and British, and they cut down almost every one of them and did not allow them to surrender. There was a guy named Banastre Tarleton, and he was one of the leaders of the British and Tory forces that were wreaking havoc on the upcountry. And when they called for surrender, they said, "Give us quarter." They said, "Oh, we'll give you Tarleton's quarter," because Tarleton was known for not giving the option to surrender to the Patriots. And Tarleton's quarter means no surrender, we're going to cut you right down like he would, and the Tory forces. The next battle to occurred January 17, 1781, and it was the Battle of Cowpens. The Battle of Cowpens would have significant ramifications for the war, and we cannot ignore this opportunity to draw a cow so we can remember the significance of the Battle of Cowpens. So, the Battle of Cowpens was way up here, and this would be a Patriot victory where the Continental Army, the major army led by George Washington, although George Washington was not here, they joined with the partisans and they tricked the British and achieved a major victory for the Patriots with the Battle of Cowpens. Now, what happened is the commanders of the Continental Army, who was Nathaniel Greene, he uses the British opinion of the militia to trick the British. The British had seen the militia lines break time and again. In other words, they ran when the British charged on them. Probably can't blame them, because that was probably scary. But what happens is the British expect the militia to run, and the British march on the Patriots. The militia, Nathaniel Greene, put the militia on front of a hill, and behind was the waiting rest of the Continental Army. Well, as expected, the British march, they fire a few volleys, and the militia, they pretend to lose and fearfully run over the hill. However, when they run over the hill, the British find a nasty surprise. The rest of the Continental Army that's based in the South fire on the British and take out the British. So, this battle is known because the Continental Army teams up with the partisans, and the militia, the partisans, they're the same, they pretend to retreat back over the hill where the Continental Army is waiting to unleash the nasty surprise on the British. There was two significances to this battle. One of the significance was the British begin to retreat to North Carolina. Now, the Battle of Yorktown was also in 1781. That was the final battle of the war, and this would kind of be the end for the beginning of the end for the British. The second significance was, up until this battle, almost all of the victories were between Patriot and Loyalist forces. The Patriots had never really beaten British troops from Britain, that were born in Britain, trained in Britain. In other words, the best in the British Army. Well, this is the first time that the Patriots defeat those troops that were born and trained in Britain, known as British regulars. The British leader was a man named Cornwallis, and he was the one who actually had the opinion that the partisans would run, and he was caught off guard when it was all just a trick. Of course, the leader of the Continentals was Nathanael Greene, and the leader of the partisans was the Wizard Owl. Who was the Wizard Owl? Yes, it was Andrew Pickens. So, today we learned about 3 new battles. And to review, we learned about the loss of Camden, which was a major defeat for the Continental Army, and this allowed almost all of South Carolina to be controlled by the British. We also learned about the Battle of Kings Mountain, which was a victory for the Patriots, and this was a turning point because it causes the British to retreat from the upcountry. And last, we learned about the most famous battle fought in South Carolina, where the trickery of the Continental Army and the partisans caused it to be the first time that the Continentals defeat mostly British regulars and caused the British to start to retreat to North Carolina. Tomorrow we're going to learn about one more battle and the significance of the capturing of British officers from the Battle of Cowpens. Until then, thank you for listening. I hope you did well.